And welcome into the Rotoworld Basketball Show as we wrap up the finals and we look forward to next year in the NBA and a little NBA draft talk as we are nights away, gentlemen, from the big night. As always, talking fantasy hoops, we have Dan Titus here beside me from Yahoo Sports and Raphielle Johnson on the end representing NBC Sports. I am Vaughn Dalzell, and I'm going to give you guys your flowers because we all nailed the Boston Celtics to win the NBA title. Not in 6 games, though. We just want a little bit extra there. But you guys have done phenomenal work all year, and I expect that to continue here as we have a big offseason to talk about. But Dan, we should probably talk about Jaylen Brown bringing home Finals MVP and the Celtics winning that 18th title. What were your thoughts overall in this series, and how close was the Finals MVP between Tatum and Brown?
Yeah, I think Jaylen Brown just showcased what we wanted to see defensively that we haven't really seen too much from him in the regular season. I mean, he averaged over a block and a steal per game, which I think ultimately set him apart from Jayson Tatum in the NBA Finals. And, you know, what we've seen from him is like a guy that, you know, his production did fall off this year in the regular season. I think it was an adjustment period for all of the starters on the Boston Celtics as they got Porzingis and Jrue Holiday into that lineup. But as we got to the playoffs, he kind of emerged as their go-to guy. He made the more impactful plays in terms of the star power. You know, he had those dunks, he had those game-saving blocks in some cases, he had some clutch three-pointers. I think he just was more of the showman than Jayson Tatum was, although you got to tip your hat off to Jayson Tatum in the way that he changed his game from being the alpha scorer to more of a playmaker. He definitely thrived in that role and did a lot in terms of his assists and creation. So I think it could have gone either way, but I think Jaylen Brown ultimately had more of those impactful moments that's why he got the MVP.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple plays in there, Raphael. I was going to ask you, we'll bring to the question, was there any distinguishing games or plays from Brown that made you feel like he was the rightful winner of the Finals MVP, or was it the same sentiment that his defense was that important in that series?
Yeah, I think it was the defense more than anything. Like, this wasn't a series that really had like any defining plays, in my opinion. You know, Boston just kind of took care of business outside of kind of falling asleep during Game 4. I think for both of those guys, we may have gotten a clue to what they can do to become more impactful fantasy guys next season and moving forward. You know, as Dan stated, the production dropped off a little bit just because you had 2 more high-level mouths to feed in Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. Can those guys continue to produce more in other areas? You know, Jaylen Brown with the defensive stats, Jayson Tatum with the assists. I think if Tatum can get to about 7 assists per game, maybe that's a way that he gets back into like the top 10 in fantasy next year. Jaylen Brown, he finished top 75. You expect him to be a top 50 player. I think increased defensive production may be what it takes for him to get back to that top 50 status next year.
Yeah, and Jaylen Brown, I feel like, is definitely going to get a bump in everybody's minds now for fantasy, that they're all going to want to take him a little earlier than he might go just because he's coming off such a great postseason performance, Finals MVP, and of course he was trending on Twitter or X during the boat, with his new girlfriend on display. So Jaylen Brown certainly winning summer 2024 right now. But a lot of Boston Celtics are. We spoke about the starting 5 all year, how it's the best starting 5 in the NBA, and guys like Tatum and Dereck White were big parts of that. They're expected to receive extensions, Raphael, and certainly when you're dishing out that much money, which is rightfully owed to both of those 2 players who made such a big impact, will they be limited at all in free agency what they're going to do with that bench?
I think it's possible, but you look at their bench, their most impactful guys outside, like Sam Hauser is going to be a free agent, so that's a concern there, but you still have Al Horford, who's essentially a 6th starter who will be back. Peyton Pritchard is still under contract. I think if anything, it puts more on someone like a Jordan Walsh to kind of step up. He didn't play much, if at all, this season as a rookie. They get more from him on the wing. I think that would be helpful in terms of their depth. You know, the NBA rules with the salary caps and the luxury tax aprons, it becomes a lot more expensive to hold on to your stars. So you need those back-end guys, those second-round picks, to kind of come good for you. So I think if anything, it's going to put more pressure on those guys that way. But I don't think it's going to be a terrible thing for them in free agency because they can easily sell. Not only will you contend for a championship, we did it, so to be able to get maybe 1 or 2 vet minimum guys in there to kind of round out a rotation, I don't think it'll be too difficult for them to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair point. I mean, it's going to be easy sell to come to Boston next year, and you're keeping, all the stars aligned there. That starting five is back, so it's just really who's going to bring what to the table. Because we saw Hauser definitely had a few games in the postseason where he made impacts. It was probably the most impactful bench player outside of Al Horford who had stepped up to be a starter at times. Dan, what's your opinion on Boston's free agency, and how excited are you to see Derrick White getting that extension?
Yeah, I think I'll start with Derrick White. I mean, I think it's obvious that he deserves an extension, and I think he's become like that marquee X factor that the Celtics need. He just puts them over the top with his ability to catch and shoot, as well as play defense and guard multiple positions. Yet, interestingly enough, like I feel like from a fantasy perspective, the Boston Celtics don't have much. They don't have much appeal outside of the starting five, but I am interested in what Peyton Pritchard can do with some increased minutes if there ever is an injury. Sam Hauser, he does have a team option. I expect that the Boston Celtics will want to try to bring him back just because he just brings them such versatility off the bench, being a knockdown three-point shooter. And whenever Porzingis is down, you'll see Al Horford getting those extra minutes. He did say that he's looking to come back at age, was he 37 now,
30,
going on 38?
He's 38. I think he's 38 right now.
Yeah, so he's old as hell. But you know what I'm saying, still effective. And if you want to draft Porzingis, I think he's a good late round option that you could still consider off the bench. Even though he plays limited minutes, he can still do enough in the stocks department in 3-pointers to make him fantasy relevant if Porzingis is ever hurt. But I think that still goes for Sam Hauser too, who was seemingly a waiver wire guy that when he sees increased minutes actually becomes a pretty good fantasy player just for his variance in 3-pointers. So yeah, I think that's like the furthest I could go in terms of like fantasy appeal of outside of those starters. But I think Rock does bring up a good point, and that second apron is certainly going to be very impactful for a lot of teams here. And when you're doling out this type of money to Jayson Tatum, Derrick White, you're going to have to penny pinch in some places. So those development projects, one of the ones that was dear to me was Jaden Springer. Like that guy just couldn't see the court on the Sixers, and yet he just got a ring with the Boston Celtics. It wouldn't surprise me if he emerges as like one of those deep in the trenches kind of guys that could see 10, 15 minutes here and there just to offset some of those starters minutes going forward.
Good points all around. I wanted to ask you guys a surprising point because, two of my best friends who I've watched the finals with, they're both Celtics fans. No idea how that happened being from the Pittsburgh area. But they both said to me, Al Horford's retiring. And part of me thought that was a possibility. But do you guys think the fact he's coming back is because the potential to win back-to-back championships? Do you think that he should retire on top?
I think that's a good point in terms of back-to-back titles. He did it in college, obviously, at Florida. He said he's feeling good in terms of the interview he gave, a few days after the parade. He's feeling good physically, so he's going to take a little time off and get to work preparing for next season. And I'm thinking I might use a top 100 pick on it. Not like too far in, but I think with Porzingis having to undergo left leg surgery and in the aftermath of the title, he said it may take months in terms of the rehab process. So then you have questions about whether or not he'll be ready to go once the season starts, once training camp starts, rather. In Horford, I think the one risk you have there, he didn't play in both ends of any back-to-backs this season. So you're kind of rolling the dice there from an availability standpoint. He stayed healthy, played 65 games, but if you're going to draft him as insurance for Porzingis, you kind of also have to take that into consideration because you're looking at a 65-game cap for Horford at this stage in his career.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. And Porzingis was phenomenal, in games 1 and 2 during the finals. I think everyone will attest to that. 32 points, 10 rebounds, 5 blocks. But you said it, no back-to-backs for him. Now he's getting a surgery. I doubt that he does that next year by any means, and he may not play a full season. So there's a lot of dark clouds around his fantasy value. Dan, where would you put Porzingis, and does Uncle Al Horford, soon to be Grandpa Al Horford at this rate if he keeps playing, where does he fall? Is he a top 100 pick for you?
Yeah, I think it's more about the rarity of Porzingis' injury from a basketball standpoint. I haven't seen a clear timeline on this, but if he's out for any extended period of time, he's definitely not playing the Olympics. I think you do spend a top 100 pick on Al Horford because of just what we've seen from him off the court. When Porzingis is off the court, he is one of the people that will anchor that front court. So yeah, I have no problem with that. And as I said, like, I think Al Horford, despite his age, still offers some upside in his ability to create defensive stats and 3-pointers at the position. So yeah, I'm good with Al Horford being a top 100 pick.
Is there anybody in Boston that we're avoiding then? Because it seems like Derrick White, Tatum, Brown, Al Horford, these guys are all getting the pass for top 100 players. Is Drew Holiday in the mix? Are we going to take a shot on Peyton Pritchard at some point? What's your opinion, Raphael?
I think Drew Holiday, at worst, he's a top 75 player. So I think you have to take him. That was just what he was this season. Before that, consistently a top 50, if not higher player. I think he'll be fine fantasy-wise. I just don't know. I think you're looking at streamers more than anything for the rest of that roster. Maybe Peyton Pritchard, but I don't think he's a must-draft guy. When you have Holiday, you have White, and then also Tatum and Brown can also take on some ball handling responsibilities. So if anything, maybe you're thinking about a Sam Hauser if he re-signs, like a late round pick, but I don't really see too much. I think I'm in agreement with Dan here in terms of the roster from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Dan, to that?
No, I feel like Raph pretty much covered it. I mean, at this point, the Celtics are just such position. I don't know. They're so deep that in their front five, that's like someone's going to have to sacrifice. And this year it was Drew Holiday. Raph and I participated in a couple of mock drafts already, and Holiday went in the 7th and 8th round of those drafts. That's like right where I expect him to be, top 75-ish range. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much that's going to be the cost of Drew Holiday going forward. Like, he's no longer a 4th, 5th round guy, which is where he was drafted this year. I think now we've seen this team go through the regular season, dominate, and postseason too. This is what his standard is going to be going forward, which is still solid. Like, you can still take the efficiency, the 3-pointers, and the steals, but just don't expect the scoring to be what it was in Milwaukee.
Yeah, the second half of his postseason was much stronger than the first half of it. I felt like he's a guy, when called upon, you could definitely rely on him. But in fantasy, he'd probably be, my 5th option of those 5 starters there in Boston, maybe 4th, considering the injury with the center position. But it's not all Boston Celtics here. We do got to talk the Dallas Mavericks. But after that, we got a lot of head coaching conversations we had, new deals, and some trades that went down. Can't believe the Chicago Bulls were involved in that one, but we'll get to that. But Dallas Mavericks, obviously, Slovenian superstar Luka Doncic, dealt with a lot all season. He's going to have the Summer Olympics if he does play, Dan. We know that in the past, he's had some issues to start the season out, and when he's played in the Olympics, and same when he hasn't. So how do you think he could be affected here, and what do you expect in this offseason for Luka?
I'm concerned about what injuries he kind of has been dealing with throughout the postseason, whether it be the knee thing, the ankle, the back. He's just beat up. And usually he spends the offseason, his conditioning's always been like a question mark. So I feel like if he has enough time between the NBA Finals and the Olympics to kind of rest up, get as close to 100% as he can, this actually could be a good thing for him, because he usually doesn't come to training camp in particularly great health, right? Like, it seems like he's always working off that like beer gut to some extent. So, having to play all off season in the Olympic format, like, he should be coming into training camp in pretty good condition, which is what I think a lot of people want to see. That said, it also could put more wear and tear on him, and he could be one of those risks that you draft super early that, might take him a little bit of time to kind of get back into NBA game shape ready, playing, 38 minutes multiple times a week. Like, it's a lot of bear, especially coming through, the Olympics, where Slovenia should be one of the better teams at the Olympics. So slight concern. I like that he's going to be playing basketball all year round, but there is some concern about the wear and tear there as well.
Yeah, I mean, his usage rate is so high, and I mean, at times it seems like he may be the only scoring option for Dallas, especially in the NBA Finals for first or second quarters. But Raphael, same question for you. What do you think? Where would you put him if he does play in the Olympics? Does that hinder at all where you would draft him?
Well, not really. And we have to note that they aren't even guaranteed to be in the Olympics. Now, they have a qualifying tournament. One of 4 qualifying tournaments. The one they're participating in also has Greece, and Greece means Giannis. So only one of those teams gets to go to Paris. That starts July 2nd. July 2nd through 7th. So we'll have a better idea of what his summer will look like after that point. I'm still taking him with a top 5 pick. I know there's some questions about the turnovers that can be a bit problematic, but he brings so much table in terms of fantasy value that I don't think that can be overlooked. Last summer he was banged up, but he came in better from a stamina standpoint, better conditioning because he had to play in the FIBA World Cup with Slovenia. So another summer of international competition may help him there, but like Dan said, the wear and tear is where you get concerned. Either way, as long as he's not dealing with any debilitating injuries, I think you have to take him with a top 5 pick in fantasy.
Yeah,
maybe even top 3.
It's going to be hard to argue.
Yeah, I think you can argue top 3 too. Yeah.
Who was you? The two people before that, Dan?
Wemby, Jokic, Luka.
Mm-hmm.
And then
you got SGA in that mix.
And then SGA, and then SGA, Tyrese Halliburton. Then it gets into that kind of that tier. But I feel like you've seen enough of the usage that you spoke to, Vaughn, and the production. Like not many people can potentially get average 39 and 9, potentially 10 and 10. Like there's only a handful of people that can do that. And Luka's obviously that. So I feel like you got to draft him as such. And we did see some improvement in his free throw shooting. Turnovers is always going to be a concern with someone with such a high usage rate. But when you're taking the production across those other categories, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I still loved what I saw from Luka outside all the barking at the referees. But we do know that his upper lip will be in shape for next season, no matter if he plays Olympics or not. So he got a lot of work done in that series. How about Kyrie Irving, though? He was at the forefront of a few games. Obviously, games 1 and 2, he was cast for the friendly ghost. But, game 3 and on, he kind of started showing up. So average draft position, Dan, where is Kyrie ranked for you next year?
He's a second rounder for me. I think he could go mid to late second round. There's a lot of people. This is going to be a really interesting draft season because I feel like there's a younger tier of players that have now just kind of jumped the line, so to speak, of some of the veterans. And he could be one of those efficiency guys that falls. Like he's a 50, 40, 90 contender every year. The assist numbers are obviously going to drop down a little bit just because he's having to share the ball with Luka. But there's only 3 people that I'm actually interested in rostering from the Dallas Mavericks going forward. And it's Luka, Kyrie, and Dereck Lively. So, yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about Lively in a bit. But I think Kyrie Irving's value is pretty safe, just considering that he's the 1B to Luka in Dallas.
Yeah, round 2 for you too, Raphael?
Yeah, round 2. I think you may be able to get him in round 3, though, for the reason that Dan mentioned. People are going to be looking at some of those so-called shiny toys, so to speak, in terms of fantasy value. Like, obviously, Victor Wembanyama moving up into that 1-1 conversation, going to drop everybody else down a peg. Chet Holmgren, how high does he go after a really good rookie season? That's another person where if you're in category leagues, winning block shots with one player potentially, that's something that's kind of difficult to overlook there. So I think Kyrie, I would certainly draft him in the second round, but I would not be shocked if some people got him for really good value in the third.
And I'm a fan of Kyrie, but fantasy-wise, I feel like this is start to see where we're going to see him start dropping off in his career. Every year is going to be a round or 2 later from here on out. But that was certainly going to try and add on to the offseason. Before we talk about that, though, Dan, you did mention Dereck Lively, him being that third guy worth owning. Obviously, him and Daniel Gafford the second half of the season was quite the duo. They wreaked havoc at certain points. So you think Dereck Lively is obviously the better choice, and he goes first, correct?
Yeah, I think there's an argument for Daniel Gafford just from what he did in the regular season and at points in the postseason. But I think as the postseason wore on, you saw Dereck Lively get more of an opportunity to showcase what he can be and what he can do. Like obviously as a lob threat and interior presence, he just offers more offensively to me than Daniel Gafford. In the short pick and roll, he can pass and play make a little bit. He's a good free throw shooter relative to his size, and he even hit a 3-point shot. So if this guy works in the offseason to potentially extend that range, who knows? He was working on this. I see Raph like giving me the skeptical.
No, go ahead.
He was working on this at Duke. He was working on it.
Yeah.
His shot isn't that bad. It's not. It's better than Daniel Gafford. Let's put it that way.
I agree. The reason for my facial expression was that Nico Harrison, the general manager of the Mavericks, they asked him about that during his end of season press conference, and he basically shot it down. It's like, you're not going to see Dereck Lively firing up 3-pointers next year. Maybe that comes in time, But you look at that lineup where you have Luka and Kyrie, there's really no like incentive for them to have Lively playing that pick and pop big role, especially like you said, he can make plays out of the short roll, and he's a credible lob threat. So I think having him hang out on the perimeter would be against Dallas's best interest. So I don't expect to see too much there. But yeah, I'm with you on Lively. I think he offers a far higher fantasy ceiling than Daniel Gafford, especially with the way he rebounded the basketball. Now, both are good rebounders. Lively's getting you a double-double off the bench, plus the block shots. I mean, yeah, he's the guy that I think fantasy managers should certainly be targeting among the Mavericks bigs in drafts this fall.
And if he meets the minimum,
be overdrafted, actually, because of his performance. You think he was like what a top 40 player
being a starter? Yeah, he was way up there.
Yeah, those are both fair points. I was going to say Dereck Lively too. If he plays the minimum requirement for minutes in games this year, he's certainly able to lead the league in field goal percentage. Just because of his how close he does play. So if you're playing that type of league categories and everything, like he's a very big incentive. I feel like having on your roster. So it's a sweep across the board because I loved what I saw from him, and I feel like next year a lot of people are going to be reaching for Dereck Lively Jr., but it may not be a reach, to be honest. One guy though should talk about from the offseason is Tim Hardaway Jr. because I do feel like he did not play enough in that series because they needed more offense. They had Maxi Kleber out there deciding not to shoot when he's wide open, when Tim Hardaway Jr. would have just chucked it without thinking twice. So, Raphielle, you're saying let him walk, it looks like. If you do feel that way, who's a good replacement?
I'm going to apologize because I did say in our last show that maybe he's someone who could get into the rotation in like game 2. And it really didn't happen outside. I think it was game 4 where he came off the bench firing in a blowout. It didn't happen. And it seems quite clear that Tim Hardaway Sr. believes that his son should be on the way out of Dallas as well. I think he looks forward to that. He deleted the comment on Instagram, of course, but someone said they should trade him. We're ready to go. To summarize what Tim Hardaway Sr. said, he's heading into a contract year, $16.2 million. That's even more reason to want to get somewhere where you can showcase what you think you can do because you want to get paid. So I get that, but yeah, he may be one of the pieces that they have to not only improve the roster, but get more money freed up to potentially re-sign Derrick Jones Jr. because he was on a bargain contract this year. It's going to cost him a lot more to keep airplane mode in the fold.
Yeah, I was with you too. I thought that he should have played more in that series. Thought he'd be in the rotation. Game 1 he got in there a little bit, and the blowout just ensued. Go ahead.
I thought he would play more.
I
didn't know if he should play more.
I thought that he should play more, and I felt like they gave up on him too early in that series because they needed offense. I mean, when they went to Josh Green and Maxi Kleber out there, and I was just like, you got to bring in someone that you're paying far more millions of dollars who can shoot the threes without a thought. But at that point, the series was almost over. I mean, I will say this too because we didn't mention this earlier. When Dallas did win Game 4, part of me thought, not saying that it was planned to lose on purpose, but Boston would much rather win at home where they were dominant, breaking home records right in front of their fans. I kind of felt like Boston was like, y'all could have this after the first quarter. Anybody else feel confident enough to say that, or are we just going to let that slide?
I mean, it was a very convenient time to get blown out when they literally dominated all facets of the game and the other ones. I mean, that was the only game that the Mavericks scored over 100 points. Like, they were locking them down the whole time. Then all of a sudden, oh, hey, here's your Tim Hardaway Jr. moment. Like, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Looking back on it, I thought that was far too easy. So it was always Celtics in 5.
So you hammered Celtics 6.5 in Game 5.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it was, I was watching it live, and I was like, all right, we need some, 13.5s, 14.5s.
Yeah, give me the alt lines at this point.
Yeah, at that point, man. It was ugly basketball. The whole postseason in general, I felt like, was a little bit National Blowout Association-esque. It wasn't the NBA. So hopefully we can get a little more competitive next year, but Boston undoubtedly was the best team. And Dallas, don't want to say they were lucky to be there, but there was a lot of good teams in the West, and they happened to be the one to survive. But before we move on to the head coaching hires, because there's so much to talk about regarding that, Derrick Jones Jr., looking to re-sign him. Where do you guys put him ADP wise?
Well off the radar.
He's a late rounder at best. Like I'm hard pressed to draft anyone outside of the Kyrie, Luka, and Derrick Lively. Like Derrick Jones Jr. might have some moments just because of his stocks and his threes, but I'd actually be more interested in what Dallas is going to do. I know we're just talking about Tim Hardaway Jr., what his future is, but I think he's like one of their only trade pieces. They've been trying to get rid of him for a while. Mm-hmm. I think he could be like one of those guys that's involved in a sign-in trade because they need some kind of offensive catch and shoot threat in that starting lineup. I think they should be going for Klay Thompson. Like I think that's like one of the perfect fits that they could get, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Derrick Jones Jr. and Daniel Gafford sounds like we're wrapping them in caution tape for fantasy next year. There's places to be had elsewhere. So I like the breakdowns there, gentlemen. On the other side of this, I do have to tell you, the Olympic and Paralympic trials are ahead. It's the ultimate tryout for the toughest team to make. Elite athletes from all over the country compete for a chance to join Team USA in Paris, but only the best will be selected. You can watch the U.S. Olympic team trials today through June 30th, only on NBC and Peacock. So go ahead and check that out. I'm excited to see the gymnastics. I was a fan when my little cousin used to go, guys. She used to win like all through 11. When she was 11, 12, she used to win all the competitions. Then she just quit because she was like, yeah, this is boring now. And I'm like, you go to college for free. So I know my uncle, her dad was real mad about that one. But talking about some great coaches, as we said earlier, we prefaced JJ Redick could be the coach of the Lakers. Dan Hurley ended up saying, I'm good. I'll go back to UConn and attempt to go for the three-peat. Kenny Atkinson also getting hired with Cleveland, and then our boy Monty Williams getting fired in Detroit. So a lot of good stuff to talk about, gentlemen. Raphielle, kick it off. Where do you want to go? What excites you about those three names?
We need to leave Monty out of that. I think the JJ Redick hire at the Lakers, it's low-hanging fruit. Like the Lakers are one of those franchises that if you talk about them on any show, it's automatically going to draw eyeballs. But I think it's an interesting move where you're going with another coach who doesn't have prior NBA head coaching experience. He has youth basketball experience, but at least Darvin Ham was a prior NBA assistant. So I don't know. The Lakers, it's always something where it's like it feels like they're kind of looking for a scapegoat to throw under the bus. And then when it's successful, like Frank Vogel winning the title in the bubble, everybody comes out and raises their hand to let you know they had their part in the success. JJ's taking his job is difficult to pass up. You get to work with potentially LeBron James and Anthony Davis. I think the Davis connection is going to be of greater importance to this franchise because he's got the one who conceivably has more years left to play basketball. So he has to be the focal point of whatever they do on both ends of the floor. I know LeBron's got a player option coming up, but you certainly have to take his thoughts into consideration with these types of things, but it has to be about Anthony Davis. You also have some things to answer in terms of Taurean Prince, D'Angelo Russell on the remainder of that roster, whether or not Russell, opts in or goes into free agency. What's that roster going to look like? Because, man, this feels like a significant roll of the dice for the Lakers, but maybe it'll work out.
I mean, we all had our hopes high at some point for the Lakers, but for the most part, we knew that the rotation, that 8, 9, 10 guys, really good names. You look at that roster and you think this is a very talented team, but a lot of those pieces just did not fit together, Raphielle. And I feel like JJ Redick and LeBron, if you saw any of those podcast clips, them together, and JJ Redick drawing plays or talking about plays, and LeBron kind of nodding, responding like he's already the coach. You see the chemistry and the respect there too. So I feel like LeBron will be back with the Lakers. I feel like JJ Redick will somewhat have respect to LeBron, but whether or not the team has success, I mean, I'm not ready to go there quite yet. I think they should look like a totally different roster, Dan. What's your opinions on the hire there, and do you expect LA to be totally different looking next year?
I don't know how they can look totally different. I feel like LeBron's going to be back. I agree with you. And if their true future outlook is based on Anthony Davis and not LeBron James, they should have probably hired James Borrego. But because that was who Anthony Davis voiced that he wanted in the building from his time in New Orleans with him. And he also has head coaching experience and assistant coaching experience. So, if you're taking the longer term view of this, it's like, hey, do you want the guy that is going to be here in 5 years from now, or the guy that could opt out tomorrow? Again, LeBron's probably going to return. He probably, even though his camp doesn't want to say they had any influence in this, like clearly he did. But I think it's pretty interesting that, like, I don't know how good JJ Redick is going to be as a head coach. He understands the modern game. He's obviously a basketball savant. He seems to have a close connection with NBA players. They have his respect. Like, that's a huge thing in today's world of social media and just this player empowerment era. Like, I think he gets it. That should help. But if you're looking at the roster, it's going to be another playing team. Like, this team isn't going to magically become a contending team in the West just because JJ Redick's there. And with rumors of like people like Chris Paul being interested, like, all right, what are y'all building over here? Like, this is not going to be a team that's going to win. And so I'm surprised that JJ Redick would want such a marquee team in his first experience as a head coach. This hasn't ended well for the previous coaches before him. But I don't know. The Lakers obviously view him as this Pat Riley-esque type of guy. So I don't know. He may be able to withstand a couple of bad seasons or mediocre seasons to eventually be, one of their, the coach of the future for them. I think it's pretty interesting, like that Mind the Game podcast. Him and LeBron were talking about why certain teams don't do things on inbounds plays. And then the Boston Celtics actually implemented one of those plays and got a couple turnovers off it. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting that, like, you can see he knows the X's and O's of this. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But am I surprised that JJ Redick's the coach? No. Am I expecting him to be, Steve Kerr right out the gates? Absolutely not. Like, this is going to take some time to build. This could probably be more of a Steve Nash situation before it's like a Steve Kerr.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that one. Was that a bar, Raphael, or you disagree?
No, I'm saying if it's more Steve Nash than Steve Kerr, he might not be there very long.
That's what I'm saying. But they've already given him, like, I feel like you're passing on so many, like, solid guys that have either had significant experience as an assistant or has at least been a head coach. To just throw out the guy, it just seems like a popular vote. Hey, let's bring some more eyes to the team. This guy's young. He's from Duke. It just seems like a marketing play to me.
Also, the West is going to be even better than it was this year.
Yeah.
First and foremost, Memphis is going to be healthy, and that's not a play-in team. Like, they're going to be they're going to be much better than that.
The Thunder are going to be way better.
Oklahoma City's they're going to be better. San Antonio, whether or not they reached a play-in, I don't know, but that's a team that I don't think Victor Wembanyama is going to get any worse than he was as a rookie. So, the Lakers' name certainly has cachet, but this is a very difficult job to take on in your first head coaching game.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I would add another team on the Houston Rockets to that list too, man.
Yeah,
saw them actually end up very strong too, and I think they have a lot of young players there. So, yeah, all across the board. I mean, you look at the West, and the only team that might drop off could be, the Clippers or the Suns, depending on what type of moves they make this offseason. But we'll definitely get to those teams as well. But, talking about LeBron's former team, the Cavaliers, they signed Kenny Atkinson. Was this a win-win for them? And also, what do you expect from Donovan Mitchell in the future, Raphael? Like, do you expect him to be around more than this season or be a trade option this year?
Yeah. I think Cleveland really wants to re-sign him. They're going to offer him the max or something close to it, from what I understand. So keep him around. They don't really want to trade any of the core four that they have, so to speak, with him, Garland, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley. I think the thing about Atkinson is that he did well with Allen and Karis LeVert when he was in Brooklyn, the head coach of the Nets. And obviously, they made that change after Kyrie and Kevin Durant kind of, took over there. But I think it's a good hire. The thing is with Cleveland, they need to figure out what that roster is going to look like if they're going to stick with that core four, as they say. You read up on the coaching hire, the reported coaching hire, and it looks like Dan Gilbert had some sway as the owner. you're Kobe Altman. You know, are you the ultimate final voice in that room? And is that something that may be an issue for you, you know, based on this? So I think they've got some questions to answer, but it's a clear playoff team if they keep that group together, obviously.
Yeah, I think Cleveland's still a team to be reckoned with. Obviously, they lose Donovan Mitchell. I'm not going to feel nearly as confident what that team's going to be able to accomplish offensively without him. But Mitchell at times seemed like he was fed up, but he is obviously a 30-point scorer wherever he ends up. So I'm excited to see what his future looks like because he's going to require a bag of Dan. Kenny Atkinson to Cleveland, are you a fan of it and your expectations of Spida?
Yeah, I think that Raph makes a good point. Kenny Atkinson's familiarity with Karis LeVert and Jared Allen certain probably played into that. But I think Kenny Atkinson, like, you know, going back to the JJ Redick conversation, like I think I would want that proven head coach in the building, especially with so much talent around. I think they're going to have a money problem very soon. And if they do decide to give Donovan Mitchell that extension, which it looks like, Evan Mobley is also extension eligible. And I don't know that if you're going to pay Jared Allen, who's, I think he might be extension eligible too. It's going to be tough to keep all this core four around. And I wouldn't be surprised if they started to explore some trades for someone like a Darius Garland if they do bring back Donovan Mitchell, because their on-off, you know, relationship wasn't the best. Garland definitely struggled at times this year playing with Donovan Mitchell. And I think from a fantasy perspective, Donovan Mitchell was outstanding. Like, I think he was probably one of the bigger surprises. Like, he's always a top first, second round type pick. But I mean, he performed as a top 10 guy this year when healthy. So if Darius Garland's gone, I mean, I think we had to start having the conversation of where is Donovan Mitchell actually a first round pick, which I don't think many people expected considering his efficiency. He doesn't really do much for stocks, but this year he did. And you talk about being a 30-point scorer on top of having the usage rate of a point guard. Like, Donovan Mitchell looks really attractive, but then also Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, that front court's a little clunky. So we'll see what they decide, but I think getting Kenny Atkinson in the building was definitely a good first move as they approach the offseason.
Yeah, you know, some people make a point about him playing, Mitchell playing on Cleveland, and that's why his defensive numbers went up, but he also played on one of the best defensive teams in Utah for years too. And it's like, he's not, you know, known as one of the best guard defenders in the NBA, but he certainly is played on teams that, you know, put him in positive positions to be one of the better defenders, or better guards, I should say. But speaking of getting paid like he may, Spicy P, staying with the Pacers, 4 years, $189 million. The duo of him and Halliburton are going to be awesome to watch, in my opinion. So not only for the development of him, Raphielle, Halliburton, but for the Pacers in general, what does this mean, getting Spicy P?
It kind of cements them as a contender in the East. Obviously, reached the conference finals this year. In terms of fantasy value, I don't know. I think he's clearly a top 50 player. I just don't know how far up into the top 50 I would go with Siakam. I don't know, man. He's not a fantasy player that really excites me, especially at that point in drafts. And that's not the Knicks fan in me talking here. So, you know, I don't know. He's a top 50 guy for sure, but I don't know if I would go in like top 25, top 30 range for Siakam.
Yeah, I think that's pushing it for sure. He is a primary scorer, I would say. I mean, at least he's a secondary scorer for Indiana, but at points, I would definitely say, especially in the playoffs, he was the guy for them. So, Dan, where do you rank Spicy P ADP-wise?
I'd say he's in that fourth, fifth round territory. So as Raph suggested, it's like a top 50 player. I like that he's at least staying in one of the most high tempo offenses, and obviously playing with Tyrese Halliburton is going to be a good thing. But, you know, he's not going to, I think I expect him to be like a 21, 7 rebound and 4 assists type of guy with some stocks. Maybe he can go up in a couple of areas on that. But like Raph said, I think he's kind of like one of those like solid floor type players than high upside that you're looking for in those mid rounds.
Yeah, that's well said, and that's the way I would advertise too. The 4th and 5th round sounds about right for him, but I'm not sure you're going to get that consistency of, you know, 28 and 6 per game from Siakam. And you know who's getting that for him? His former teammate, Scottie Barnes. And that's why he's getting a max rookie extension, because he had a phenomenal season this year. So Raphielle, I mean, I know you're pretty pumped. He's a guy that's climbing draft boards. Where would you put him and take him next year?
Yeah, I'm always fired up to watch people get paid, but $270 million, that's a lot of bread, man.
Yeah.
He's clearly the focal point of what they want to do in Toronto in terms of the rebuild. He's someone that, he was only a top 50 pick, and he outperformed that quite by a significant margin. You're talking about a top 25 player when he was healthy. Do I draft him that high? I think you can get away with a third-round pick for Scottie Barnes just because of everything he brings to the table. He's improved as a perimeter shooter. He's still not where you would want like a marquee offensive option to be, but good with the steals, good with the rebounding, but the assists as well. I think the one question with the assists is a full season with he and Emmanuel quickly on the floor together. If they re-sign quickly, which seems to be the expectation, will he drop from 6.1 to say 5.1 assists per game? That's not a huge drop, but you kind of wonder how that would affect his overall fantasy ranking. I think he's got top 20, top 25 potential. I'd probably lean that 25 to 30 range in terms of where I'd pick him.
It seems pretty fair with how his production is. I expect him to be, if not his usage rates to increase next year, if not stay what it was the second half of the season. But Dan, where are you putting him ADP wise? And do you think he is going to be the man moving forward? Better question, actually. Do you think he was so far the best player in that 2021 NBA draft? That was Evan Mobley, Cunningham, Şengün, Giddey, Jalen Green, all those guys.
Right now, he's definitely at the top three of them. I don't know if I'm going to anoint him just yet, but I think he's definitely on the path. I think it's interesting. I think it makes sense that Toronto paid him, but when you're paying these guys $270 million, he's not the most marketable athlete, right? So there's always like a money. Is he going to bring in crowds? That's the one hesitancy I have about giving $270 million for like Kawhi Leonard 2.0, but from a marketability standpoint, at least. Yeah. Production wise, I thought he could be like a second round guy, but I do feel what Raph is saying in terms of like if they decide to bring back Emmanuel quickly, could we see a drop off in those assists? The defensive numbers will always be there. I think field goal percentage will also be pretty strong. In the 25-game sample that he had with Emmanuel quickly, the one area that did drop was his scoring, which I thought was interesting. He dropped down to like 18 a game, still maintained 7 boards and 6 assists. But I think over the length of an entire season, and when you factor in RJ Barrett being way better, completely different player than he was, he's going to command some of that usage too. So this could just be a more balanced roster than he had, for the other 55 plus games that he had in the season. So I think an early third is appropriate. And I think that we might see, based on his numbers, some people reach in the second rounds. Like, I won't be surprised when they do, but I think the value is actually more as like a top 30 guy than, in that top 24, which is where he was at last year.
I like that point. I was going to say to Raphael's point too, about the $270 million and the marketing, to your point, Dan. I did not know he was getting that much money for a max rookie deal nowadays. Man,
insane.
Wemby's going to cross 300 by the time they have New London, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is getting to be unbelievable. But certainly wish I was a better athlete growing up.
Bro, if you got some kids, man, make sure you get them in some AAU format, because these kids are getting crazy guaranteed money too. Like that's a huge difference in football. Like this is insane amount of money that's being. I just
spent the last week being stepping into my new stepdad role, for you guys to know. Absolutely loved it, but bro. Thank you. I appreciate that. It was a lot of fun. I slept great every single night. I was knocked out. But I was going to say all week, I'm like, what sports can I get them into? Which one gets the most money? And now I guess it's back to basketball, which is cool with me. It was baseball for a while, but now it's basketball. But talking about new deals as well, the last player to cover for this area is Malik Monk, who was looking like the sixth man of the year until it got taken away from him there at the very end by Nas Reed, baby. So Malik Monk back in Sacramento. It's a win-win situation for the Kings, obviously. But what does it mean for fantasy value next season, Dan?
I think he's a guy that you can draft. I mean, I was really encouraged by more of the assists that he was producing off the bench. He can get to 17, 18 points a game with 5 dimes. And Sacramento, we'll see what they do in free agency and in this offseason here. There have been some rumors swirling around Zach LaVine, a couple other players. But, I mean, I think locking up Malik Monk for 4 years, $78 million was like a steal, considering what he's provided for bench scoring over the last several years. And shout out to them for making a deal that's very affordable in this climate for someone that's giving them that type of production.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to argue against that type of money that they got for him, considering what he does for the bench, which is so hard to find in the NBA nowadays. And Raphael, I know you're going to agree with most of that, but add your wrinkle to the Malik Monk deal.
Yeah, I think I'm interested to see what they do in terms of potential trades. You know, they need to get better on the wings. You look at Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes. You know, what do they move one? Do they move both? Do they have to, stand pat? I think that's going to be something to watch. Malik Monk, I think he's a late rounder in terms of draft value, because Davion Mitchell hasn't worked out as the backup point guard. I think Keon Ellis kind of passed him in the rotation. But when you have a player like Malik Monk who showed the ability to make plays for others in addition to score, maybe his usage increases in that 6-man role this year. But, yeah, I think he's a late rounder in terms of fantasy value. I wouldn't go too high unless they somehow decide to move him into the starting lineup and they traded one of those wings. And you're maybe talking about top 100 potentially if you were to be given that type of role.
Yeah, top 100 I feel like would be pretty fair, considering he's always going to be getting the necessary minutes, I think, to get the numbers that he put up last season. But Malik Monk, I think, is a clear winner staying in Sacramento, but no matter where he ended up, would probably have been on a team that's contending for a title, given what he provides for his services. I was surprised, like I said earlier, that the Chicago Bulls were the first team to make a deal. Oklahoma City Thunder involved in that. Al's Caruso for Josh Giddey. We figured Giddey was getting traded. We talked about this numerous times this season. So the fact that it goes to my favorite team certainly had me drop my head when I found out. But the fantasy impact of that certainly would probably be positive for both players, I would say. And Caruso's getting the extension, so we know he'll be in the rotation full time. So, Dan, who wins this trade and who has the better fantasy impact next season?
I was actually really curious of your opinion, man. How did the Bulls not get at least a draft pick out of this deal, man? Like, they have so many draft picks. You could have at least just asked the question, and they probably would have given it to you. Not only that, they denied so many. I mean, what was their asking price for Caruso? Like multiple first-round picks. Yeah. Like they were smoking crack to just give him away for Josh Giddey, man. Like, I just don't understand what the Bulls are doing. And you're the fan, so like that's why I was like, man, Vaughn's probably just steaming, fuming right now.
Yeah, when I found out, I was like, I just put my phone back down and was like, why would we do that? Like a year ago, before we found out what Josh Giddey, his little allegations, what he did earlier this season, that made me skeptical of him in general as a human being. And then in the decisions he makes as a human being, I should say. And then going on to his playing time in the second half of the season, the playoffs, I'm like, why are we giving up Alex Caruso, who was a main component of a rotation and one of the best defending guards? I mean, am I happy that as a fan, I don't have to see Alex Caruso guard Giannis almost every single play and guard all their post players? Yeah, I'm sick of seeing that happen. But Josh Giddey coming to the Bulls was not something I had on my bingo card and not something that I wanted as a fan, but it's what I got this summer, baby. What do you think, Raphael?
It's interesting because like I feel like Giddey's market was probably not that high anyway because he's due for an extension. You're gonna have to pay. Like the Thunder was gonna have to trade him at some point because they weren't gonna give him an extension. So I'm like, they really didn't have any leverage in this, and yet they still got Alex Caruso out of it, an all-defensive player. It just didn't make any sense. But fantasy-wise, to answer your question, it's a good thing for Josh Giddey. Because like Lonzo Ball's not really looking like he's going to hit the court anytime soon. Like he's running, but I see him podcasting more than shooting up shots in the gym. So I mean, Giddey's going to have potentially a really high usage rate, and DeMar DeRozan is an unrestricted free agent. We don't know what he's going to decide. He could come back, but if he doesn't, that doesn't leave a lot of scoring. Not that Giddey's a scorer, but just production-wise, that just leaves a lot to be had in Chicago on side of Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu. But Caruso, probably not as valuable in Oklahoma City from a fantasy perspective, but I think in the minutes that he's going to get, he's still going to be a force defensively. So there's still going to be an angle for him to be drafted as a late round guy just based off what he can do in the stocks department.
Yeah, this Chicago offseason, I want them to make it like the main street of my hometown. Tear it all down and rebuild, baby. DeRozan, I've enjoyed the entire experience, but yeah, I would move on if I was him. Zach LaVine, we already know. Just a lot of these Bulls players, I feel like their time is going to be cut very short. We're going to suffer a lot of losing here in the near future. So, Josh Giddey, welcome to the party. Raphael, what's your opinions on the trade? Do you agree that OKC was the winner?
Yeah, well, on that part, for sure. But I don't think Chicago is going to fully rebuild here. Now, they should. I would say, like, what's the value in finishing 9th or 10th in the East? You know, I guess you kind of con enough people to continue to buy tickets. They once again had one of the highest attendances in the in the NBA this season. But it's like you kind of con people and thinking they have a chance, and they know damn well they don't. It's like, come on, I don't know. They need to get those guys out of there. Just go young, but I don't think they're going to do it because you have enough older guys in there who can make a run for like 38 to 41 wins. That'll keep the coffers filled in terms of, you know, ticket sales for 41 home dates. And I kind of feel like that's all the ownership there really cares about at this point. Like the White Sox aren't making Reinsdorf any money, so he has to get it from the Bulls. As for fantasy, I think this raises Josh Giddey's ceiling, but he's still not someone that I would look to draft because he can't shoot. And I think as a non-shooting point guard, you have to be elite in other areas. And I don't think he is, especially when you're talking about working his way into a new team. Now, I am concerned about what this could mean for Kobe White in terms of his usage and fantasy potential, but if they clear the decks completely, I don't think that's going to be a concern at all from a usage standpoint.
Yeah, a lot of that I'm going to agree with. And I mean, as a fan, you hit the nail on the head a lot. We definitely get told that we're going to be, you know, a contender, but in reality, it's going to be we're a 6th seed at the best every single season. And I mean, this year it was over for me when I took them under 38.5 wins, and then they won 39 games, and I said I'm totally done with this team. Just to, you know, not to do anything, but moving from Josh Giddey, let's talk about another potential Tinder match, Dan. Let's talk about Paul George and the Philadelphia Sixers. What do we think? Match made in heaven? You swiping left?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what his camp is. I mean, he's doing it to himself. Like, I don't understand why he's talking about how, you know, the James Harden trade made it increasingly difficult for him to, you know, have to play, you know, this much with more effort. And, you know, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what, maybe he doesn't want to go to Philly or whatever, but I think it makes sense. Like, they have the money to spend on him. I think he solves the need for an elite 3-and-D guy to anchor that alongside Maxey and Embiid. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like he's particularly interested in going to Philly. So it wouldn't surprise me if he re-signed with the Clippers and he just rides out the rest of this with the Clippers, and they're getting a new stadium. Maybe Kawhi Leonard can get healthy at some point. James Harden is likely going to re-sign there. Just run it back and, you know, enjoy your life in LA because that's what you like to do. But it doesn't seem like to me he's committed to winning if he doesn't want to leave Los Angeles, because they're not going to win anything with their aging stars just getting that much more older.
I hope he's happy, man. I hope he's happy in LA. Someone's got to give him some good relationship advice if he's not happy there. You can't just stick around then, man. He's got to go win a championship, Dan, and that's going to be in Philly, right? No, I'm just kidding. But
I don't know if that's happening either. But I'd like the chances more if he's in Philly than in LA. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. 100%. The East is a lot weaker, and you got Joel Embiid on your side. and
Sure.
Tyrese Maxey. But let me ask you, if you could deal up your own trade package to get Paul George, Tobias Harris is the start. Who else gets added in?
You can't
No,
trade.
they don't have anybody left to
He's
really
a
get
free
off
agent.
on it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
Wow.
the Sixers have like all the cap space in the world because I think the only guys that are really under contract are Embiid, Maxey will be very shortly, and then it's like Paul Reed and a bunch of other like back end kind of bum kind of guys. So yeah, I mean they got all the money to spend. It's just a matter of where they're going to do it.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun offseason then as a Sixers fan. I wish you the best because your offseason will be better than mine. Raphielle,
that much is true.
it's already off to a better start. What's your opinion on the Paul George rumors? Seems like Dan doesn't think it's going to happen. If it doesn't, anybody you think could end up in Philly?
I think you have to look at OG Anunoby. He has a decision to make regarding whether or not to opt into the final year of his deal. I think the expectation is that he's going to go into free agency. I expect him to re-sign with the Knicks, but if you're Philadelphia and he's out there in the open market, why wouldn't you try to make an offer? You strengthen your team, also weakening another rival, for seeding in the East. The only question with him is availability. He can't seem to stay healthy. That would be the concern if you're Philadelphia or New York. But I think with New York, the amount of personnel they gave up to acquire him, I don't think you do that if you don't believe that you're going to be able to re-sign him eventually. And also, he's a CAA guy. Leon Rose, all those guys are CAA guys. So I'd expect something to get done there. But if you're Philly and he's out there and you don't hear anything coming through the grapevine on June 30th about him re-signing with the Knicks, it would be in your best interest probably throw in an offer because he'll be cheaper than Paul George, I believe.
Way cheaper.
Yeah, that's a fair point too. I didn't even think about him as a potential option, but I think that it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be fun to see how Philadelphia rebuilds that roster because now this is really like a whole process again, Dan, that you guys have to retrust. So
can't wait.
A lot of Drake playing in Philadelphia these days. A lot of trust issues, my friends. But I do got to tell you about the Tour de France. The toughest cycling race of the year is back. The Tour de France takes the world's top cyclists on a mountainous 21-day journey. The streams, exclusive coverage all race long starting this Saturday, June 29th at 6:30 a.m. Eastern on Peacock. So wake up and get your breakfast ready to check that one out. And fun fact, that's the first time I've ever said mountainous in my life. All right. The 2024 NBA draft is just days away, gentlemen. The Atlanta Hawks had the first overall pick. A lot of reports, but all of them different directions. We don't know where they are certainly going yet. So, Raphielle, is there any strong opinions for you on what Atlanta could do?
Not really. I think Alexander Sarr and Zachary Risacher are the two guys you hear about the most in terms of potentially being first overall. Risacher actually worked out for the Hawks and had a good workout. They haven't been able to get anything organized with Sarr. And now there's no rule that says you can't draft a guy that you haven't been able to work out, but I kind of feel like you want to be able to, at the minimum, have a conversation with them to kind of figure out, their headspace and whether or not they'll fit with your roster. So I think one of those two will go first. I've seen some different reports about the Spurs being really interested in Risacher, but they're at number 4. Maybe we get a trade to open up the draft on Wednesday. That would be something to keep an eye on because San Antonio is still in talent acquisition mode in terms of their rebuild. They've got Wemby. I think the jury is out on a lot of those other guys regarding their fit around Wembanyama. Risacher is a versatile forward who can play either the 3 or the 4. Good athlete. I think he's got a relatively high floor too. So I think he may be the name to kind of keep an eye out on between now and Wednesday night. I wouldn't be shocked if we went to Atlanta or if there were a trade for someone else looking to get it.
Yeah, Risacher is the number 1 odds-on favorite right now at most sports books. So it seems like he is at least the betting favorite. But Sarr right there behind him at 3rd, and Donovan Clingham is another name, the UConn star, right behind Risacher. But not sure if they would go Clingham because he's not even a favorite to go top 5 outside of number 1. So it seems like Atlanta is choosing between those two right now. Dan, any opinions there?
No, I think the number one pick is all over the place because Sarr refused to go with the Atlanta Hawks. I think he was the presumed number one overall pick, has the highest ceiling in this class by a lot of draft experts. So for him not to go number one means he'll probably fall to the Wizards potentially at number two, which is interesting because they obviously need a center, but I don't know. That's like the worst situation, one of the worst situations you could go to as a rookie in terms of culture building and actual development. So I don't know why his camp would oppose the Atlanta Hawks just to go to the Washington Wizards. So maybe there's something else at play here. Maybe there's a potential draft, trade opportunities in that top 3, 4, probably the top 4 there. I think the most exciting player from this draft, at least from a fantasy perspective, I think is Reed Shepherd. I was reading something about Kevin Pelton talking about how, not only he shot 50% from 3 last year, like obviously he's not going to shoot that in the league, but I think it shows you that there's a profile of him being like a legitimate outside threat. And when you combine that when he was had one of the best steal rates in the NCAA. So I think anytime you can get a guy that can get threes and steals in fantasy, I'm definitely interested in that. And right now he's been pegged to the Houston Rockets, which I think would actually be a really cool landing spot potentially for what they're building there. But we'll see. I think Stephon Castle is also an interesting play if the San Antonio Spurs decide to hold their pick at 4, considering what Raph just talked about and them not being super interested in all the options that they have right there at guard. He's a guy that's 6'6", can guard multiple positions. Questionable shooter, but playmaking is definitely there. And when you have Wemby there, like anybody that's playing with Wemby is obviously going to have some upside there.
Yeah, Stephon Castle is actually someone I was going to know too that I'm interested in for fantasy purposes, depending on where he goes, because he's a points, rebounds, assists type of guy. Averaged 12.5 points, 6 boards, and 3 assists per game in March Madness tournament. I also like his teammate Tristan Newton, who could be found later in the draft, but he was also a guy who was 14 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 assists, in the March Madness tournament. So those two in particular, I feel like are good fits and they played on good programs, but I do like the Shepherd Caldwell because I felt like he was a boss last season. So Raphael, who are some guys you'd look at for fantasy purposes next year, depending on where they fall?
Yeah, I think if we can get Tyler Kolek to the Suns, I'd really like that. Point guard out of Marquette. Excellent in the 2-man game. And obviously, as we saw with the Suns, they're in dire need of a point guard. I don't think that fan base is going to want to sit through another year of trying to see if Booker and Beal can figure out the point guard in addition to what they do as scorers. So I think if he can go at 22, and I think I've seen a few mocks where he's been mocked to Phoenix at 22, he would be someone to really watch in fantasy. I don't think he would be like a mid-round pick, but he's someone definitely consider with a late-round flyer for that reason, just because of the way he plays and his potential fit with that team. So he's one. And I think the other one would be Devin Carter out of Providence. I'm sticking with the Big East guys here. So he's a really good scorer, really good athlete, son of former Heat player Anthony Carter. So he knows the NBA game. He's got the size of a point guard. So I think that's what you're looking for there too. He could be a lottery pick. So I think that's someone else to kind of think about there.
So definitely some fair names. I like the Big East bring ups here. Dan, do you have anybody else that you'd like to add there? Any Big East players or other conferences?
I'm intrigued by Cody Williams. I don't know where he's right now. I see him mocked to Portland a lot. He's Jalen Williams' younger brother. So I think he's only a freshman and he was hurt for a lot of the season. But I think he could definitely offer the Portland Trailblazers some much needed size on the wing there, on top of Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons currently.
That's a great call, and I did not know that was his brother. But now that I'm looking at a picture of him, that makes 100% sense. So great call there. Hopefully he's just as talented as his brother, and that's a fun one to be talking about here. But as always, the show was amazing. We'll be back on Wednesday next week, regular time as always, 3 p.m. Eastern. But a lot to talk about regarding what happens this next week in the NBA. As always, please follow Dan Titus at Yahoo Sports, Raphielle Johnson at NBC Sports, and myself at NBC Sports. Thank you, Adam, and the rest of the producers as always, and those of you who are watching with us live. Hope you have a great day, and hope your team gets someone you want this summer.